Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. Well, let's ease into this. So, I had a very relaxing day today. I sometimes find it hard to have people around me all the time. Yeah, I'm not a super social person, and some days there's just it's just like nonstop. Especially if I'm busy and I got to get stuff done. It can just really drive me crazy. And and so today was just a day where there's just all kinds of people, kids here, and all of this sort of stuff. Right, keeps my wife happy, but it's very hard for me sometimes to coexist in this. Just I don't know. I'm more of a silence and solitude kind of guy. I very much like a very quiet life, and for the most part, I prefer to be alone. You know, um, I like being married. I like having a family and everything, but on another level, I just prefer to be myself by myself. Keep my own company and keep my own counsel. Anyways, tonight we're going to get back into this topic of jurisdiction and what it means materially and spiritually. So I'm going to go over a few of the things I went over last night. I'm going to visit them again. So in the simplest possible terms, a jurisdiction is a geographic area under a certain set of laws. And those laws are administered by a certain type of justice, okay? Now, as cultures have emerged on this planet, there have been many different kinds of cultures have come to this planet. Now, I say come to the planet because there's no indigenous human culture. Okay? It's not. Everything going on here is extraterrestrial. Okay? It's just all extraterrestrial. And for example, I come from the Celtic gods, the Tuatha De Danann. Many of you will come from a different line of gods, and but the gods aren't really the be-all and end-all. They're several orders of magnitude below what we would call the creator. And so we can get a little bit too involved with this idea of our culture. It can become an attachment like anything else, and that's not a good thing. Okay? Now, at the same time, many of these cultures can do a lot for us. They can enrich our fortune, they can heal our health, they can give us wisdom, and I guess you could say that's what the gods are there for, whomever your gods are. And each of these physical astral connections forms a jurisdiction and basically a learning cycle in the world. Okay? So we're all at different stages of learning in the world. We're not all the same. And this is something that people raised in democratic societies have a hard time hearing. We're not all the same. There are groups of people on this planet and cultures on this planet that are literally millions of years behind other groups of people in terms of their evolution, spiritual evolution, and what they have to do down here and what they have to learn. Now, a lot of stuff has happened on this planet that has been done deliberately. And it's been done deliberately to kind of throw a monkey wrench into things down here, so things don't go as smoothly as they should. There's a lot of NPCs on the planet now, non-playing characters. And these are physical forms that are not what you or I would call spiritually animated. If you meet them at a food court, at a shopping mall, or on the street, or in a coffee shop, you might not know that they're not human because they can kind of fit in really well. But that extra dimension that's inside human beings, we'll stick with my language, which is the awakened imagination. They don't have it. And when you allude to it, they don't even understand what you're talking about. They're not even capable of understanding it. It may as well be advanced theoretical physics to them. They just can't get it. And a lot of these people are very easy to use by principalities. Okay? And the principalities, of course, are the forces above us and generally in the astral. And this would include our cultural gods and things like this, okay? So there's a lot of principalities that are going around now and gathering up a lot of these NPCs because we live in a system that is by consensus, majority consensus, 51% of the population. And the election we're going into is a really good example of what I'm talking about, okay? And look, I have to repeat myself every show because I don't want people to think I'm a big MAGA guy. I just happen to think that the alignment of Donald Trump, Vivek Ramaswamy, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., and Elon Musk is probably the best chance we have of maintaining the nation of the United States, which is critical to other nations having a chance to maintain themselves. Because if the United States folds, there's no centralized power. There's no hope for the smaller nations. Canada's a complete write-off now. I think unless something dramatic happens in Canada, it's a lost nation. Okay? I'm reading I'm reading things now coming out of Australia where there's Australian ministers of parliament now from India. And they're getting cabinet positions. There's one gentleman, he got a position as Minister of Cultural Affairs. I'm not sure if you're Australian. I don't mean to offend you. I'm not exactly sure what the ministry is called. But he's taken to speaking like the former Prime Minister of Scotland, who became famous for that clip on X where there's too many whites in education in Scotland. There's too many whites in government. There's too many whites in the arts. And just like an anti-white tirade. And now it's going on in Australia. And these are just whores. They don't really believe what they're saying. They're just basically people who've learned to do what our own leaders, who are our own skin color, have been doing for 40 years, which is just lie to us and say whatever they have to do to get into power and to please, more importantly, to please whomever or whatever it is that got them into power. And there's this tremendous anti-white sentiment now, and it's in Canada as well. And it's coming from a white Catholic Prime Minister in the form of Justin Trudeau. He's culturally Catholic. The Trudeaus are a Catholic family, okay? He said outrageous things too. He said, I find the term old stock Canadians, referring to white Christian Europeans, repulsive. And if given the opportunity, I would replace them. He literally said this out loud in like 2014, 2015, before he even got into power. So where are these ideas coming from? And this is something that you should notice, okay? When you see certain things being parroted, okay? Like this anti-white sentiment, like this transgender sentiment, okay? Like this there is no gender sentiment. And they try to make it look as though it's an organic, global cultural phenomenon if you don't know how things work. And more specifically, if you don't know how jurisdiction works. So for the first time in human history, we're seeing an overture toward global jurisdiction now. Even though there's no global government yet formally, I mean, informally, I'd say we've been in full globalization now since, I don't know, 2001, 2002, sometime around there. It may not seem that way, right? You know, but one of the impediments to the open declaration of globalization is the reformation of the Middle East in the favor of Israel, because the globalization that's coming is going to be this globalization that the rabbis were talking about. If you think, like, if you think this is going to be some amorphous democratic socialism run out of Belgium, you're not fucking paying attention, okay? And the reason I say that is when you scratch the surface a little bit and you go just underneath the veneer of these NGOs and organizations and these globalist organizations like the World Health Organization, stuff like that, you find the same characters. Okay? So in many ways, we're already in a global jurisdiction now. And the people generally relied upon to run things in this global jurisdiction are Jews or some form of sexual deviant like Trudeau or Macron, or like that little freak that, you know, is the director of the WHO. He's Somalian, I believe. He's YouTube is not okay. He's Somalian, I believe. But I don't know if you know this, but there are Somalian Jews. They're one of the few African countries in the world that have Jews, and he's gay. So he's like the he's like the twofer one, right? He's a twofer in this globalization nonsense. Oh, come on, man. There we go. Come on. I don't know what's going on here. Now my mouse isn't working. I have so much problem. So many problems here. It's really kind of mind-boggling. Like, I've been working on the computer all day. I've had no problems. Now I just have, oh, there we go. Open Studio. Okay, bring the studio over here. There we go. Okay, I got it all worked out. So there's a correlation between, unbelievable. Like, it's really unbelievable. Now my mouse isn't working. I cannot believe the shit I have to put up with when I go to do a podcast. Okay, hang on a sec. I'm going to deal with this. Okay. Let's see if I've got it. No, I've got no mouse now. Man, this, oh, there it is. Okay. Okay, there we go. So when I talk about an astrophysical jurisdiction, the easiest way for you folks to see it and tune into it is looking at the mindset of somebody. Like, where are they coming from? What are they promoting? Okay? Are they promoting the transgenderism, which is a prelude to transhumanism, which is a prelude to a completely captured human race with no possibility of spiritual growth? Which is what an element of the human race wants, by the way. Okay? And it's not, it's extraterrestrial, but it's not extraterrestrial. And I'll tell you why. because the extraterrestrials can't land here and foist it on us by force. Because if they were to do that to a civilization that was not as advanced as they were, that would invoke a law in the cosmos that would allow a defender race to come in and say, no, you can't do that. And so this concept we all have in our hearts of standing up to bullies, especially when a bully is harming somebody that is incapable of defending themselves, we all have this innate sensibility of stepping in and helping the person. That's a universal concept, okay? And this is why you don't see the outrageous manifestations yet, okay? Because we're still in a kind of checkmate situation. As long as we're not formally and legally is the most important, okay? As long as we're not formally and legally a global culture, there will always be more than one astral party helping, influencing, guiding, and protecting the human race, or various cultures within the human race. And a lot of these astral cultures are simpatico, meaning they may differ, but they get along with each other. Okay? And as I've said before on the Talamanca Review, most of the gods in our history are real, like they really exist, and they can physically manifest. Now you can say, well, why haven't they done it in the last 3,000 years? Why don't we see Zeus? Why don't we see the Tuatha De Danann? Why don't we see Odin? Why don't we see Thor? Because this is just the way things are running right now in this particular cycle of human history. So jurisdiction is a huge, huge thing. I mean, just like when you look at it from the perspective of human law, okay? If you were to go to Saudi Arabia as a woman and try to walk around in the markets with Western attire, you would be culturally rebuked and maybe even arrested. I'm sure they wouldn't throw you in jail, or they might. They're very strict about these things. They've been known to throw foreigners into jail for imbibing alcohol or selling alcohol in Saudi Arabia, okay? But if you were to go there, because it's their jurisdiction, you have to follow their rules, okay? And by the way, it's considered extremely impolite to interfere in the customs and norms of another society, okay? So this is what I mean, again, what I mean when I say we've all been sort of siloed into our own growth cycles, okay, and our own cultural expressions as incarnating souls on this planet. So, for example, I don't think a society that goes outrageously beyond all other societies in terms of technology, innovation, health, medicine, I don't think there's any mandate to share these things with other societies, so long as the inventions come from your culture and from your resource base, the resources that you control in your geography. Now, the moment you have to leave either one of those two constraints, then you don't really fully culturally own what you've created. Which brings me to America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and to a lesser extent Britain. And I say a lesser extent Britain because Britain is the home country, okay? But the satellites or progeny of these countries are the United States, even, forget the War of Independence, okay? You won it briefly, and then you lost it again in 1812. So get over yourselves, okay? You're basically a British colony. The U.S. Federal Reserve follows the orders, directives, and mandates of the City of London. City of London is the financial leadership, okay? And that's all there is to it. So, but I leave Britain outside of the inner circle of the four British, prosperous, multicultural British colonies because those colonies are different. And a very unique experiment was attempted in these colonies. Now, if we were to follow the law of the Jews, which is that indigenous people have the right to their land, and this is a universal God-given law, in this instance the God being Yahweh, or Hashem, which is the God of the Jews, then that means we're all on land that isn't ours. Okay? And again, this is a jurisdictional issue, and you may think you have the right to ignore these things. Okay? Well, I'm not political, Bruce. I don't get involved in that stuff. If there's one time in your life you should pay attention, participate, and contribute your voice in a democratic process, it's now. Okay? Because the laws and customs being decided now are life and death. And they're huge. Okay? And it's very interesting the way the narrative in the media is cultivated. Okay? So let's go to Israel. Well, Israel has always been the homeland of the Jews. There have always been Jews in Israel. I mean, before the formal state of Israel in 1948, there were Jews there. Okay? They lived with Arabs and they lived with Christians. Okay? But this idea that Zionism created, that Israel was the homeland of the Jews and all the Jews had to be brought home, okay, is a very interesting jurisdictional movement. And it's interesting because you kind of have to have an opinion on it. Unless you're living in the ancestral land your people occupied for this whole cycle. And according to the Jews, this cycle is in year 5,782 or something. Okay? Something like that. And if you're not on the land of your ancestors, then you're on somebody else's land. And if the world accepts the precedent, because action is precedent, okay? The Jews are going for a jurisdictional precedent the world has never seen here before, okay? And I might say they're contradicting themselves quite a bit. Nobody talks about that hypocrisy because Jewish finance ministers, Jewish deputy prime ministers, and Jewish leadership embedded in diaspora countries was as much involved in the British, Portuguese, Spanish, and Italian colonization as any Christian was. Okay? This is another thing they never get called on. Okay? They never get called on it. But if you go, Christopher Columbus himself was a crypto Jew. Was not an Italian, was a crypto Jew. Okay? And this idea of the crypto Jew is huge. That's a whole topic unto itself, okay? I'll leave that to people better versed in that than me. But we came and we took this land from native peoples who were generally living peacefully, and they had principalities. Okay? In fact, they probably had some of the highest principalities ever to interact with the human race. Because the less you organize and structure your society and the less you build upon your land, the more whether you're conscious of it or not, the more you're deferring to the primary principality, which is the Creator itself. And the Creator is not a God. Okay? The Creator, again, I keep saying the same thing, but repetition is a big part of learning. The Creator is amorphous. Okay? Now you could say any spirit is amorphous. If you interact with higher beings, whether they be an extraterrestrial race that starts interacting with your life, they can do things that represent a mastery of time. They're not really bound to the laws of time, so they're outside of time. They can do supernatural things. They can make things disappear and reappear in your house. And you could say, well, Bruce, isn't that amorphous? No. That's an individual being doing that. A non-physical being, but an individual being or a group of beings, okay? The Creator itself is everything all at once, okay? It's the leaves on the tree. It's the grass. It's every single human being. It's your cat. It's your dog. It's the minerals that have the life force in them. The Creator is everything simultaneously. Now, when you understand that, you become aware of the fact that native populations were actually relying upon the highest principality known to interact with man. Okay? By respecting the creation and not molesting it with human copycat creation, because we can't really create anything. We can just mimic what we see and come up with a human version of it. Okay? That's all we can do. All right? And that's all we ever do. All right? So you could say that the computer is the human mimicry of the human brain. That's it. A decision is put in front of you, it's yes or no. 28 decisions are put in front of you that are yes or no, and the sequence in which you answer those questions and the volume of yeses and the volumes of no will greatly change the outcome at the end of the 28 decision cycle, okay, in a human being's life, just like a computer. So it's a metaphor for the human mind and how the mind works, okay? So that's all we do, is we basically just copy the Creator, which is kind of a useless spiritual exercise when you think about it. You could say, well, it might create more convenience in our lives, but does it really? Have you ever asked yourself? I ask myself questions like this all the time. And you know why, right? Because I moved to the rainforest and I live in an earth bag house. And so I've actually taken the plunge into a 60-70% extraction from a massively built-out human society. And I'm telling you, after a decade of living this way, or let's say 8 years on the mountain, or 7 years on the mountain, and 10 years in Costa Rica, this is absolutely the superior way of living. And all that shit you have in your life is just more headaches. It's like Tyler Durden said in the Fight Club, you don't own your stuff owns you, okay? Anyways, I'm doing a classic McDonald tirade here, and I'm getting off point, okay? Here's the point. If the Jews are right, literally everybody on the planet, I'd have to do more research into this. I don't know which African tribes are on the actual land their people lived on for the last 5,000 or 10,000 years. Maybe the Maasai, and they still live quite traditionally. Very, very bizarre people, by the way, the Maasai. They live on a diet of cow's milk and blood. So they mix the milk of a cow and the blood of a cow, and that's their diet. They don't masticate, they don't chew. And they're hunters. So go figure. But it probably affects Africa as well. The Middle East, you had people moving around there all the time for centuries. One group murdering another group, taking their water hole. All this kind of craziness, okay? So I think it's reasonable to say, without being, wait for it, hyperbolic, that we now live in a world where nobody is living on their ancestral land. If I were living on my ancestral land, I'd be on the Isle of Man, okay? An island just off Scotland, which is where the McDonald's are from, okay? Or the Isle of Skye, I'm sorry. One of the others. And I wouldn't be here. I'd be in Scotland, okay? But my family got on the boats in 1798 and went over to Canada. Okay, so here's where it gets interesting as you get into these jurisdictional issues, okay? And why you have to have an opinion at this point in history. Because if you don't have an opinion, you're just going to get killed. I mean, they've already started the killing, let's be honest, right? They've already started the killing. So, and coinciding with the commencement of the killing is what's going on alongside with it? The expansion of Israel, okay? So, and they claim all that land is theirs. They want to go back to, I think, like the King David geography of what the Hebrews controlled in that region. Now, I personally don't think any human being or group of human beings can make a claim like that. That's just my opinion, and I'm open to being proven wrong. Okay? But if your proof or your evidence is my God, and it's in this book, the Torah or whatever, fuck you. That's not proof. Okay? God wrote this book. Fuck you. God's never had 5 fingers and a fountain pen in his hand. God's never written a scroll in his life. Remember, God is amorphous. doesn't have fingers. Okay? So how could God write a book? Right? So don't tell me that's legal. And that's what they're trying to do, by the way. They're trying to tell us that this is all legal script. Okay? Because Judaism is it's the most legal religion on the planet. Okay? So if they're right, and they could be, I'd give them a 1 or a 2% margin for being right. I'm 98% sure they're wrong, 99% sure they're wrong, but I'll give them 1 or 2%, okay? Because nothing is certain. I don't know for sure. It's not like God said, Bruce, you know. But it's just common sense when you look around, because the vicissitudes of life, which vicissitude means the changing fortunes of life, blow human beings all over the world, okay? Now, here's an interesting thing. The only people who are whole unto themselves and have never violated other countries in terms of expansionist policies or controlling policies are the Chinese. And I realized this when I lived there from 92 to 94 in Taiwan, and I studied Chinese history. And I went, holy cow, man. These motherfuckers have never gotten on boats and gone and sacked another culture. They've never done that. In many ways, not always, but in many ways, the Chinese are the most civilized people on the planet. Oh, I know, Bruce. How could you say that? Look at the history. They've never done this stuff. They've never gone out and fucked over other countries. Now, inside their own borders, and there's a lot of different kinds of Chinese, and there's a lot of different dialects of the Chinese language. And if you don't speak the dialect, you can't understand it. Okay? It's like it all comes off a similar phonetic root. Okay? And the written system of the language, instead of letters, it has what are called radicals. And a radical is a kind of phonetic and pictographic piece of information simultaneously. It's much more advanced than our language. I'll tell you that right now. It is much more advanced than our language. Okay? So, if two groups of people like the Fujianese and the Cantonese can't communicate with each other verbally, do you know what they do? They write. Because they can write what they're thinking down, and the written form of the language is universal. Okay? It's universal. There are not different written scripts in Chinese. There's only one set of radicals, and there's 267 radicals. But the way those radicals can be combined into a language and spoken is so varied and so different that you have something like, I'm not even going to guess, but over 20, it could be over 100 for all I know. But I'm just, to be safe, I'm going to say at least 20 different dialects in mainland China. So different that if you don't speak it, you can't listen to it and understand it. Okay? So now within that milieu, within Chinese culture, they've raided each other, they've killed each other, they've raped and pillaged, they've looted, they've killed each other's kings and princes. And you got to read a book called The Three Kingdoms, which was the war for the position of Chinese emperor, okay? Fascinating piece of classic Chinese literature. I think it's about at least 800 years old, maybe more, maybe 1,400 years old, okay? The Three Kingdoms, it's called, okay? Fascinating tale. So, but aside from that, in terms of global participation, like trying to take over the world and attacking other peoples and stuff like that, the Chinese have never done it. Never done it. And in that regard, they're the most civilized people on the planet. And don't let anybody tell you different, okay? Because it's the truth. They are very, very civilized. They've never done what Cheney, Bush, and Rumsfeld have done. Now, they've started to do it now. They do it a little bit differently, okay? They go in, they build you a football stadium, they build you a few hospitals, some schools, and you think, wow, these Chinese are so generous. And then you find out that they've just learned the old Rothschild banking trip, that to own and control people, you get them indebted to you. And that's what the Chinese are doing. They're holding these countries to debt. And the debt can always be paid because if there's no capital to pay the debt, if the countries the Chinese do the infrastructure building in can't get enough of an economy going to produce a currency to repay the debt, the Chinese go, you know what, that's okay. Don't worry about the currency. We happened to notice that you have some lithium in the northwest of your country. We're just going to drop a Chinese mining company here. And because you haven't been able to develop an economy, despite the fact that we built you schools and universities, we're just going to grab up this lithium here. That's the way the Chinese roll now. But that's all new. That's all the last 15 or 20 years. In their 8,000-year history, they never did this. And all their history shows is they don't like people who do that either. The Chinese hate the Japanese. Did you guys know that? This is an ancient feud, okay? So, the Japanese were kind of brutal, you know? They were kind of brutal, and they were expansionist, okay? They were definitely expansionist, and when they joined forces with Mussolini and Hitler in World War II, most of their focus was in subduing and taking over China. That's where most of the Japanese war effort was, okay? And so the Japanese did things in China you can't even say aloud in polite society. Again, here's another book recommendation for you. Read a book called The Rape of Nanjing, and Nanjing is Nanjing. It's a city. The Rape of Nanjing. And it's a fascinating story, but not for the faint of heart, okay? So, little sideline I did there on civility and jurisdiction, and give the Chinese their due. They've been very civilized in terms of leaving other countries alone. However, we return to the primary question. Do a people have the right to an ancestral home? Are the Jews right? Spiritually, morally, ethically, are they right? I say no. Okay, I'll give you my answer first, and it's not like it's a conversation. You can't speak back to me. I'm podcasting, but I'll give you my opinion nonetheless. My opinion is no. I think it's the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard. I don't give a shit there's a temple buried under the earth, okay? I come from the Tuatha De Danann. Do I have a right to go and stake a flag beside Stonehenge and said, fuck you, my people built this? I own this now? No, I would be laughed at if I tried to do that. If I got together 300, 500, 1,000 ethnic Celts in modern times who would be Welsh, Irish, and Scottish and said, this is ours. This goes back to our ancient religion and the ancient gods we worked with. I want this land right now. There's hardly anybody in the world who could not do that right now. And so the question becomes, what are the Jews asking us to do? Okay? And here's the point about jurisdiction, okay? Let me just spend a bit more time on jurisdiction. I just gave the example of Saudi Arabia, okay? So if you went to Saudi Arabia as a British or American woman, and you thought you could stroll down their streets in pumps and a mini dress and your cleavage showing and ruby red lipstick like you're ready to do an OnlyFans live stream, you're not going to be able to do that. Okay? So is that a universal human right for women to be able to behave that way? It isn't. It's a jurisdictional right. Okay? It is a jurisdictional right. And there's only a few jurisdictions in the world that allow women to behave that way. Okay? And they're mainly in the first world. And if they're not in the first world, they're second world countries who are accommodating the sex tourism of first world inclinations, like Thailand. Okay? Like the Philippines. Okay? So there's an example of jurisdiction. Now, what happened in the West? In this multicultural experiment in the forfeiture of gods and the emergence of secularism, what happened? What is the jurisdiction of Canada now, as I've defined it spiritually? What is the jurisdiction of Ireland? What is the jurisdiction of the United States? What is the jurisdiction of Australia? Okay? There is none. This is the point. You've been stripped of spiritual jurisdiction. And that's why you're getting all these snooty fucking brown guys in the fucking Paki in Scotland and the low-caste Indian piece of shit in Australia saying there's too many running around and being entertained by publicly paid media like the BBC or the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. There's too many white people. Too many white people. And let's be honest, as white people, that hurts a little bit in the heart, right? Why is that? Why is that? Why do you feel that like, hey, that's not right, but you can't quite get your mind around it, right? Because there's been all this training for the last 20 or 30 years in the education system to strip you of spiritual jurisdiction, to secularize you, to automate you, and to make you a non-playing character. And when you lose land, you lose your body rights too. Okay? All of our rights come from the land. That's why they set the legal system, the international merchant system, on the sea. Because we have no rights on the sea. Because when we're on a vessel on the sea, what are we? We're chattel. That's what we are. We're property in transit insured by the broker that runs the shipping company. That's why we live under mercantile law. That's why we live under, admiralty law. These guys aren't stupid. Okay? They're not fucking stupid at all. You know, they're way smarter than us, actually. You can't really beat them thinking them, which is why you got to develop your heart and speak from your heart. Because they can't do that. Okay? They literally can't do that. Like, you will never see Alan Dershowitz speak from his heart. Okay? You will never see Tony Blinken speak from his heart. You will never see Starmer, the present leader of Britain, speak from his heart. Because he can't. Because he's got none. He's got no heart. Okay? So in the absence of spiritual jurisdiction, almost anything can be done to us. Almost anything can be done to us. Which is why all this stuff is being done to us now. Because we have not declared a spiritual jurisdiction. I know. It sounds so weird. It sounds completely abstract. Like, Bruce, what the fuck are you talking about? You're going to have to contemplate this podcast tonight. I can't fill it all in. Part of it has to come from your awakened imagination. I can stimulate the contemplation for you so you can listen to this podcast, go sit down with your back straight for 30 minutes, close your eyes and just say, what the hell was Bruce talking about? And see what pictures come into your imagination. See if you can access awakened imagination. Okay? But this is the true law. This is the true law. Now, whether the Jews are right or not is a philosophical question. If they achieve what they set out to achieve, and it looks like they're going to, okay, then what's going to happen is they're going to set a new precedent. And that precedent will be the basis of all law going forward, exercised by who? The International Criminal Court in The Hague? No. The U.S. Supreme Court? No. The Canadian Supreme Court? No. The Sanhedrin. And they will use Israel as the precedent for all future adjudications. And it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. And this is why I say whether Israel has the right to do this or not is irrelevant. At this moment in history, it's a philosophical question. If they achieve the Greater Israel Project, kill all their enemies, and build the third temple, we're going to be living in their world. And that will be a world governed by the values they've been working towards for the last 400 years. Don't let anybody tell you that Zionism began with some fucking doofus named Theodor Herzl in the 1890s. That's fucking bullshit. It began probably in Amsterdam at the time of Sabbatai Levi, which was 1666. That's when the real push for Zion began. Okay? The Palestinian homeland. The Talmud would reveal all this, but those sections of the Talmud, they would make sure no goy eyes ever saw. Okay? And even within the Jewish world, you'd have to study with a rabbi for a number of years before they would trust you enough to show you that stuff. But that's what I suspect the real truth is, okay? That they've been working at this for about 400 years. And all of their ancillary friends and partners have been working with them, which is why they let certain aspects of their magical system out, which is not really their magical system. They fucking stole it from the four corners of the world. They stole it from the Egyptians, who, by the way, stole it from the Tuatha De Danann, okay, which some people call the tribe of Dan. And they stole it from the Babylonians. All the blood work and the human sacrifice, they get all that from all the witch bitches that fucking Solomon was banging. And why do they worship Solomon so much? He was a fucking piece of shit. Okay? The wisest man who ever lived. What would the world be like if everybody behaved like Solomon? There'd be no fucking world. That's the only litmus test you need to realize he wasn't that fucking wise. Okay? Solomon represents the ultimate evolutionary conquest mentality. It's purely fucking reptilian. You get it? Okay? That's what we're up against. This reptilian mindset. If I can kill it and take it, it's mine. If I can, and even better, according to the rabbis, if I can kill it, take it legally, it's really mine. Okay? And that's why law's so important for these people. Because law gives them the right to do what they want to do. And they want to fuck everybody in the ass, and that's why they're changing all the gender and all the laws around this, because they're demonic and they're natural sodomites. And then that's why they're doing this. Okay? The fuck got into me tonight? I don't know. So, so we're right on the cusp now. Okay? We will live in the darkest world you've ever known if the Jews get what they want. Noahide law, the Sanhedrin, and rule from Jerusalem with the third temple built, and the animal sacrifices, and let's be honest, probably human sacrifices, okay? When all of that gets going again, we're going to be living in a world so dark, we won't even the time we're living in now will seem like a golden age, okay? Now, this won't last long. That's the only consolation. And by the way, I think they're going to get it. Okay? Because there's so many forces working in concert with them. I mean, even when you look at this shit show in the United States, nobody will speak against the Jews. Not Kamala Harris, not Donald Trump, not JFK Jr., not Tulsi Gabbard, nobody. Not Tim Waltz, nobody. Why is that? When you reach a certain level in the system, do you get let into the Jewish think tank and you go, oh my God, they're so smart, they've been right all along? No, I seriously doubt that's how it goes down. I think it's more like the Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, P. Diddy way it goes down. That's what I think, right? So as Charles Dickens said at the beginning of A Tale of Two Cities, it's the best of times and the worst of times. Okay? It's the best of times because all the truth is bubbling up now. It's the worst of times because we're going to have to live through a fucking shit show. It's going to be a snuff film for about a decade and a half. Okay? And it's going to come crashing down real hard. And it's going to end quickly. And then we're going to go into what I would call a divine period. But I don't see anything that can stop these Jews now. And I don't think anybody's really working against them. Okay? Chabad Lubavitch is one of the most cradled and pampered religious sects in Vladimir Putin's Russia. Did you know that? Vladimir Putin has built more centers for the Jews than almost any culture on the face of the earth. Okay? So if you think he's this mighty Christian warrior, you're fucking crazy. It's all drama. Okay? It's all just drama. Like the sacking of the Eastern Orthodox churches in Ukraine. It's all drama. Okay? There's no reality to it whatsoever. Where it's all leading and how it's all going to turn out, I really can't say. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen on a blow-by-blow basis. I don't think nobody does. It's impossible to say, okay? But this is the importance of jurisdiction. And if the Jews can be legally accepted, which they'll do by browbeating us into it and creating so much, and this is what they do. They create all this chaos in the background that you just go, oh, Christ, just give them what they want. But it's a mistake. We shouldn't have given them the Balfour Declaration. We shouldn't have given them Israel after World War II. And we should not give them what comes next. But we're going to. Okay? Now, I don't want to contradict myself. I'm against a greater Israel. I'm against them wiping out the Gazans and the Palestinians. I'm against them going into Lebanon. I'm against them attacking Syria. But for reasons of, I don't know how I would describe them, like, I don't want to say that they're sentimental, but by my own sense of justice, okay, I do believe they deserve their temple. I do. I mean, they want it. It means something to them. It's a free will space. We may not agree with their religion. We may not agree with animal sacrifice, but it's their religion, okay? And I do think they deserve the temple. And by the way, I think this is one of the things that Trump is going to do to bring about peace, okay? And once that temple gets built, though, everything's going to change, okay? Because it's the Hadron Collider of the magical world. And you're going to start to see stuff like the equivalent, when they get that up and running, formally, with the world's attention on it, because our attention is very important as well, because we're what? We're co-creators with reality. So once they get it built above ground, they may have it built underground already. They may have started the sacrifices already. They've already sacrificed the red heifers. That already went down, okay? So that is a ritual that they have to do before the building of the temple, right? You should see how they go at this, too. There's a way the temple has to be built. The stones can't be cut by any kind of a saw. In the past, when Solomon built it, when the second temple was built, there was a kind of a worm that they used that would eat through the stone. It's very weird, okay? But the rabbis have deduced that lasers are kosher in the 21st century. So if they can do it with lasers, they'll have that temple up lickety-split. Okay? And the moment they get that temple up, boom, that's their trifecta. That's their royal straight flush in spades. No other set of cards in a 52-card deck can beat it. And then we're all going to see what this has all been about. And I'm a little curious myself. You know, from the spectator perspective of the human experience, this is going to be the greatest show on earth. It's going to be fascinating to see. And it's going to be fascinating to watch the whole thing collapse and fall apart as well. But this is what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about jurisdiction, okay? Now, when they get their jurisdiction in place, boy, I'll tell you, nomadic colonizing Christians are going to be punished for I don't know how long, like at least 7 years. Like, it's not going to be pleasant to be a white Christian living in any kind of land that created colonies. And pretty much every European nation did, right? Portugal did, Spain did, Belgium did, France did, Britain did. So, I mean, there have been European colonies all over the world. So under this new Jewish law, they will be punished. And then the Europeans who've gone to the colony countries like Canada and the United States, well, you can see what's going on there now. And this is, by the way, why it's going on. Okay? Because we're already kind of living under Noahide law, whether you realize it or not. Okay? We are. I mean, I could make the case for it, but it's a whole other podcast, and I'm not prepared to do that right now. But we are really living at a governmental level. We're living under Noahide law now, which is why these colony states like Canada and the United States and Australia are being broken and reassembled. Okay? Because we're operating under the Jewish version of law. And so the home countries are going to be invaded with immigrants, and the displaced white European Christians in the 4 countries of the Five Eyes that left Britain they're going to be repopulated. Okay, so your best chance at survival is to do something like I did, because that's allowed. You're allowed to go to another culture, mix with that culture, win them over, live as them, live with them, and become a part of that culture. And the reason you're allowed to do that is the Jews did it for 2,000 years. So I'm basically a kind of a Jew right now, because I left Canada, I came to a Latin American country, I learned their language, and I moved into their culture. Okay? And that's permissible. But I don't think I'm going to get Stonehenge. I just don't think that's going to happen. Anyways, I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.